Privilege escalation in Windows. Our ultimate goal with privilege escalation in Windows is to gain a shell running as an administrator user or the system user. Privilege escalation can be simple, like with a kernel exploit, or require a lot of reconnaissance on the compromised system. In a lot of cases, privilege escalation may not simply rely on a single misconfiguration, but may require you to think and combine multiple misconfigurations. All privilege escalations are effectively examples of access control violations. Access control and user permissions are intrinsically linked, so when focusing on privilege escalations in Windows, understanding how Windows actually handles permissions is very important. Understanding permissions in Windows. Let's talk about user accounts. User accounts are used to log into a Windows system. You can think of a user account as a collection of settings or preferences that are bound to some unique identity. There is a local administrator account, which is created by default at installation, and depending on the version of Windows, there are several other default user accounts, like the guest account. Service accounts are, somewhat obviously, used to run services in Windows. However, unlike user accounts, you cannot use a service account to log into a Windows system. The system account is a default service account, which has the highest privileges of any local account in Windows. There are a few other default service accounts, including network service and local service. User accounts can belong to multiple groups, and groups can have multiple users. Groups can even belong to other groups. Groups allow for easier access control to resources by setting group-wide permissions that apply to all members of that group, rather than having to set permissions for every individual member separately. Regular groups, like the administrators or users group, have a set list of members, while pseudo groups, like the authenticated users group, have a dynamic list of members which changes based on certain interactions. For example, the authenticated users group contains a list of all users who are authenticated to the system. In Windows, there are multiple types of resource which are also known as objects. Some examples are files, directories, registry entries, and services. Whether a user and a group has permission to perform a certain action on a resource depends on that resource's access control list, known as an ACL. Permissions to access a certain resource in Windows are controlled by the access control list, the ACL, for that resource. Each ACL is made up of 0 or more access control entries, known as ACEs. Each ACE defines the relationship between a principal, i.e. a user or a group, and a certain access right. Here's an example ACL for a file. We can see that the owner of the file is the admin user, and there are a few ACEs defined. The first ACE denies all access to the file to the user. The next 4 ACEs define various access rights to users and groups, but all are actually inherited from the C directory.